You used to be on fire. There was a time, not so long ago, when you could work 12 hours straight, when goals excited you, when the future pulled you forward like a magnet, and you didn't question why you were moving. You just moved. And then something happened. Maybe it was a book. Maybe it was a meditation retreat. Maybe it was a moment of sudden clarity in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Something cracked open inside you, and you saw through the veil. You glimpsed what mystics call truth. You tasted what philosophers spend lifetimes trying to describe. And ever since then, you can't seem to care about anything. Now, here's what I want to suggest to you today. Something that might sound strange at first. What if this emptiness, this profound lack of motivation that's been haunting you, isn't a sign that something went wrong? What if it's evidence that something went extraordinarily right? You see, there's a peculiar phenomenon that Carl Jung documented throughout his decades of clinical practice. He noticed that roughly 70% of his patients who experienced genuine spiritual breakthroughs subsequently lost their drive. Their ambition evaporated, their hunger for achievement dissolved, and they came to him in panic, convinced they had broken something essential inside themselves. But Jung saw something different. He saw a pattern. And that pattern reveals a truth about consciousness that most self-help gurus will never tell you. Because what you're experiencing isn't depression. It's not laziness. It's not a character flaw or a chemical imbalance or a failure of discipline. It's the paradox of awakening. And if you don't understand what's actually happening to you, you will spend years, perhaps decades, trying to fix something that isn't broken, trying to resurrect a self that needed to die. Let me explain what I mean. Before your awakening, whatever form it took, you operated on a particular kind of fuel. We all did. This fuel had three main ingredients: fear, scarcity, and the desperate need for external validation. Think about it honestly. Why did you work so hard? Why did you chase those promotions, those achievements, those markers of success? If you are truthful with yourself, you'll find a quiet terror underneath all that ambition. The fear of being nobody. So the fear of being left behind, the fear of reaching the end of your life and discovering it, meant nothing. This fear is an extraordinarily effective motivator. It can drive you to accomplish remarkable things. But here's what nobody mentions. It only works as long as you believe the story. The story that success will make you safe. The story that achievement will make you worthy. The story that if you just reach that next milestone, you'll finally feel okay. And then you woke up. You saw, and perhaps for just a moment, that the entire game was invented. That the scoreboard everyone's watching isn't measuring anything real. That the roles we play, the successful professional, the devoted parent, the admirable friend, these are costumes on a stage. And the applause, no matter how loud, doesn't touch whatever you actually are underneath. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. And here's the problem. The fuel that used to drive you was made of illusion. When the illusion dissolves, and so does the fuel. This is exactly what Alan Watts was pointing to when he spoke about what he called the law of reversed effort. Watts observed that the harder you try to be motivated, the more motivation escapes you. It's like trying to smooth water with your hands. The very effort creates more turbulence. Watts would say that you've discovered the cosmic joke. You've realized that life isn't a journey toward some future destination where happiness waits. Life is more like music. You don't listen to a symphony to get to the final note. The point isn't the ending. The point is the playing. But here's where it gets complicated. You've realized life is music, but you've forgotten how to dance. You're standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching everyone else move to rhythms you can no longer hear, wondering if you'll ever feel the beat again. And the terror of that, let me tell you, is unlike anything the uninitiated can understand. If what you're experiencing isn't a malfunction, what is it exactly? To understand, we need to descend into what Jung called the alchemical process of transformation. Specifically, we need to enter the nigredo. In medieval alchemy, practitioners worked to transform base metals into gold. But the real alchemists, the ones Jung studied obsessively, knew that the outer process was a metaphor for an inner one. They weren't trying to make literal gold. They were mapping the transformation of the human soul. And every alchemical transformation begins the same way. With putrefaction, with decay, with the blackening. The nigredo is the stage where the prima materia, the raw material, must completely decompose before anything new can emerge. You cannot transform lead into gold while it's still lead. The lead must first become nothing. This is what's happening to you. Your old identity, the one that was motivated by fear and driven by hunger for validation, is decomposing. It's supposed to decompose. This is not a tragedy. It's chemistry. But here's where most people make a catastrophic error. They panic. They try to reanimate the corpse. They attempt to summon the old motivations through sheer will, through discipline, through forcing themselves to care about things that no longer hold meaning. Jung was explicit about this. He said that trying to revive your old self during the nigredo is like trying to stuff a butterfly back into its cocoon. It cannot be done. And the attempt will only prolong your suffering. I remember speaking with a man, let's call him Michael, who spent 3 years in this exact trap. He'd had a profound awakening during a silent retreat, an experience of unity and peace that temporarily dissolved his sense of being a separate self. But when he returned to ordinary life, nothing worked anymore. His career in finance, which had once consumed him, felt absurd. His social ambitions seemed embarrassing. His entire life, which looked so impressive from the outside, felt like an elaborate performance he could no longer believe in. So he did what most people do. He tried harder. He hired coaches. He read productivity books. He set goals and built systems and white-knuckled his way through each day, trying to reconstruct the drive he'd lost. And every morning, when he woke up feeling more empty than the day before, what Michael didn't understand, what took him years to finally accept, was that he was in the nigredo. And the nigredo cannot be rushed. It has its own intelligence, its own timeline, its own purpose that the conscious mind cannot comprehend. This is the state I call psychological homelessness. You're too awake to go back to sleep, but you haven't yet learned how to live while conscious. You are caught between two worlds and are belonging fully to neither. Alan Watts had a profound insight about this state. He drew on the Buddhist concept of sunyata, which is usually translated as emptiness or void. But Watts insisted this was a mistranslation. The void isn't nothingness, it's potentiality. It's the pregnant pause before creation. Think of music again. The silences between notes aren't absences. They're essential. Without the silences, there's only noise. The silences give the notes meaning. Your emptiness right now is that silence. And if you try to fill it with the noise of forced motivation, if you refuse to let the silence be silence, you destroy the very music that's trying to emerge. Now I want to address something that might be keeping you trapped. Something our culture treats as sacred, but which functions, for the awakened, as a kind of poison. I'm talking about purpose. We've been told, haven't we, that finding your purpose is the key to a meaningful life. That purpose gives direction, creates passion, provides the fuel for extraordinary achievement. And for people who are still asleep to the constructed nature of reality, this is largely true. Purpose, as conventionally understood, works beautifully within the dream. But here's what I've observed after years of watching people navigate spiritual awakening. What most of us call purpose is actually fear wearing a more respectable costume. Think about your old sense of purpose. Examine it honestly. Wasn't it driven, at root, by a terror of being insignificant? A desperate need to matter? A hope that if you contributed enough, achieved enough, helped enough people, you would finally earn the right to exist? I call this purpose poisoning, and roughly 90% of what our culture celebrates as purpose is infected with it. There's a simple diagnostic tool I've found useful. It's what I call the because clause. Desires that come from the ego always have a because. I want success because I need respect. I want wealth because I need security. I want to change the world because I need to feel significant. But desires that come from the soul have no because. They simply are. I want to paint. I want to write. I want to garden. I want to sit with dying people. There's no justification, no explanation, no strategic reasoning. The desire exists for its own sake. During your transition, you lost access to the ego's purposes. That's why you feel purposeless. But you haven't yet learned to hear the soul's quieter, stranger callings. Alan Watts spent much of his life trying to help Westerners understand this distinction. He pointed out that our culture is obsessed with destinations. We're always going somewhere, working toward something, building toward a future where we'll finally be happy, successful, complete. But nature doesn't work this way. Rain doesn't fall in order to water the grass. It just falls. Birds don't sing to accomplish something. They just sing. The sun doesn't shine to illuminate the earth. It simply shines. Your old motivation was destination addiction, the belief that happiness exists in some future state you haven't yet reached. Your awakening killed this illusion. And without the illusion of a future paradise, the entire engine of conventional ambition stops running. This is supposed to happen. This is progress. But it doesn't feel like progress, does it? It feels like being stranded in a desert, watching your old vehicle rust and wondering if you'll ever move again. So how do we navigate this interval? How do we survive the emptiness without either filling it with noise or collapsing into despair? This brings us to what I consider the most counterintuitive practice available to the modern seeker. A practice that goes against everything our achievement-oriented culture values. The practice of conscious waiting. Jung recommended what he called active mourning, and he would have his patients write letters to their old ambitions. Actual letters, expressing gratitude for what those ambitions provided, acknowledging the purpose they served, and then formally saying goodbye. This might sound ritualistic, even strange, but there's profound wisdom in it. You see, your old motivations weren't simply delusions. They got you through. They helped you build skills, relationships, experiences. They were appropriate for the stage of consciousness you inhabited. The problem isn't that they were bad. The problem is that they're dead. And you cannot move forward while still trying to drag a corpse behind you. After the mourning comes what Jung called active imagination. This is a practice of turning toward the unconscious and asking, with genuine openness, what wants to emerge. The question isn't what should I do, or what would be impressive, or what would make others approve. The question is, what wants to be born through me? And then, crucially, you wait. Without judgment. Without filtering. Without dismissing what arises because it seems too small, or too strange, or too impractical. I've seen this work in remarkable ways. A former executive I knew, a woman who'd run international operations for a major corporation, discovered through this practice that what wanted to emerge through her was beekeeping. Not metaphorically, literally. She spent 2 years fighting this because it seemed ridiculous, a waste of her talents, a step backward. But when she finally surrendered to it, something extraordinary happened. The emptiness lifted. Energy returned. Not the frantic, fear-driven energy of her corporate days, but something steadier, more sustainable, more alive. Her soul, it turned out, didn't care about her resume. Alan Watts spoke extensively about this kind of surrender, using the Chinese concept of Wu Wei. It's often translated as non-action, but that's misleading. Wu Wei isn't passivity. It's action that doesn't force. It's effort that doesn't struggle against the nature of things. Watts used the image of muddy water. If you want muddy water to become clear, the worst thing you can do is stir it. Your efforts to clarify only create more turbulence. But if you leave the water alone, if you wait with patience and trust, the sediment naturally settles and clarity emerges on its own. Your motivation is that muddy water right now. And all your attempts to force clarity, all your goal setting and discipline and frustrated striving are just stirring up more mud. The practice is to stop stirring, not forever, not as a lifestyle, just for now, just until the water clears. Real motivation, the kind that comes from the soul rather than the ego, cannot be manufactured. It arises spontaneously, what the Taoists called ziran, naturalness or self-so-ness. It comes when conditions are right, and conditions cannot become right while you're frantically trying to control them. When the morning is complete and the water clears, something does eventually emerge. But I want to prepare you, because it won't look like what you expect. The old motivation operated like a fever, intense, consuming, exhausting. You could feel it driving you, pushing you forward with an almost manic energy. And then you'd crash, need to recover, and build up the fever again. And the new motivation doesn't work this way at all. It operates from a completely different center in your being. If the old motivation lived in your head, strategizing and planning and worrying, the new motivation lives in your body, in your gut, in some quiet knowing that doesn't require explanation. The old motivation said, I have to. The new motivation says, I get to. Or simply, I am. And here's something remarkable. The old motivation consumed your energy. After a day of driven work, you were depleted, empty, needing entertainment or substances or distraction to recover. But this new motivation generates energy. You finish your work more alive than when you started. The exhaustion you feel is the good kind, like the tiredness after physical exercise, not the soul-deadening depletion of ego-driven striving. There's another difference, one that takes time to appreciate. The old motivation was linear and constant. It demanded you be on all the time, productive every day, always moving forward. The new motivation is cyclical. It has seasons. There are times of intense activity and times of rest, times of visible creation and times of invisible germination. This is hard for modern people to accept. We've been trained to believe that consistency equals virtue, that taking a fallow period means we're failing. But nature doesn't work in straight lines. Seeds must winter in the dark soil before they can sprout. The moon must wane before it can wax again. Your new motivation will ask you to trust in rhythms you can't control, to plant seeds without knowing when they'll flower, to rest when rest is needed, even if the world calls it laziness. And there's one more quality to this new way of being, one that might surprise you. It's playful. Alan Watts loved to speak about the Hindu concept of Lila, the idea that the universe is engaged in divine play. Not work, not striving, not serious achievement. Play. Think of children before we train the play out of them. They don't create because they want to accomplish something. They create for the sheer delight of creating. They dance because dancing feels good. They ask questions because curiosity is its own reward. This is the energy of the new motivation. The heaviness of ego-driven purpose dissolves, and something lighter takes its place. You still work. You might work harder than ever, but the quality of that work transforms. It becomes more like dance than drudgery, more like making love than manufacturing output. The cosmic giggle, Watts called it. The realization that life isn't a grim test you need to pass, but a playful expression you get to participate in. This brings us to the final destination of this journey. Though calling it a destination is itself somewhat misleading. It's more like a homecoming, a return to something you never actually left, though you forgot you were there all along. When the integration is complete, when you've fully digested your awakening and allowed it to transform your relationship with action, you arrive at what I can only call embodied purpose. This isn't purpose in the old sense, a goal to reach or a mission to accomplish. It's more like becoming a channel, a vehicle through which something larger than your personal self can express itself. Jung spoke about this in terms of individuation, like the process by which the conscious ego learns to cooperate with the unconscious, with the self that is both deeply personal and somehow universal. At this stage, you stop asking, "What should I do with my life?" and start living the question, "What wants to happen through me?" This isn't passivity. It requires tremendous courage, because what wants to emerge through you may not look impressive to others. It may not earn applause or accumulate wealth or build the kind of legacy that ego craves. But here's the paradox. When you stop trying to save the world for the satisfaction of your ego, you become capable of actually helping. When you stop performing significance, something genuinely significant can move through you. I knew a woman who spent 20 years as an environmental activist, fighting tirelessly, burning herself out, accomplishing much but always at great personal cost. After her own awakening and the long integration that followed, her activism transformed completely. She still cared about the same things. She still worked. But the quality was entirely different. There was no martyrdom in it, no self-righteousness, no desperation. She simply did what was hers to do, with a kind of peaceful persistence that was somehow more effective than all her previous urgent striving. She had become, in her words, an empty flute. The music wasn't hers anymore. She just let it play. Alan Watts and Carl Jung, despite their different vocabularies, I'd arrived at the same insight. You don't recover your motivation. You discover that you were never the source of motivation in the first place. Watts put it this way: you are something that the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is something that the whole ocean is doing. Think about that. A wave doesn't try to wave. It doesn't strain to rise and fall. It doesn't worry about whether it's waving correctly or compare itself to other waves. It simply is what the ocean is doing at that particular point in space and time. Your life is what existence is doing at this particular point. Your gifts, your struggles, your strange desires, and inexplicable fascinations, these aren't random. They're the universe expressing itself through the particular form called you. When you realize this, truly realize it, and not just understand it intellectually, the question of motivation dissolves. See, you stop trying to generate power from a separate self and start allowing power to move through you from an infinite source. So here we are, at the end of this exploration, though perhaps it's really a beginning. If you are in the void,